I never thought the words would come from my own child, but they did. She looked me straight in the eye and told me I was useless now, that I should find somewhere else to go and die. I can still hear the sharpness in her voice, the way it sliced through me like glass. My daughter, the one I had carried, raised, and sacrificed everything for, had turned me into a burden she wanted to discard. And her husband stood beside her, silent but smug, as if the two of them had already decided my fate. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I had spent my whole life believing family meant love and loyalty, that the bond between a mother and child was unbreakable. I had worked my hands raw, stayed up nights worrying, given everything of myself so my family could have comfort. Yet there I was, standing in the very home I had built with my late husband, being told it no longer belonged to me, that I no longer belonged.
My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 67 years old, a widow of 2 years. For over 4 decades, I was a devoted wife to Daniel and a mother to my only daughter, Melissa. Together, Daniel and I built a life in this house, every corner carrying pieces of us. I cooked Sunday dinners here. I tended the garden he loved. I nursed him through his illness until his very last breath. And through it all, I believed Melissa would one day honor the sacrifices we made. But Melissa was always her father's favorite, the golden girl who could do no wrong. When she married Andrew, a man who spoke in numbers and opportunities, I thought she had found stability. What I didn't realize was that together, they saw me less as a mother and more as an obstacle. An old woman standing in the way of an inheritance they already felt was theirs. That day, when they told me to leave, it wasn't just my home they tried to take. They ripped away the illusion that blood alone guarantees love. My grief for Daniel was still raw, my loneliness heavy, and in that moment, betrayal was added to the weight pressing on my chest. But this was only the beginning. I didn't know it yet, but their cruelty would set in motion a chain of events that would reveal just how much strength I still carried, and how justice has a way of finding its way home. When Daniel passed, the silence in our home was deafening. After 42 years of marriage, I didn't know how to fill the space without him. I would wake in the morning and still reach across the bed for him. I would cook meals for 2 and then sit alone at the table, the chair across from me unbearably empty. Even the little things, the sound of his shoes at the door, the way he whistled while reading the newspaper were gone. I was left with memories and a grief that pressed down like a weight I could never put down. Melissa appeared during those weeks like a savior, or at least, that's what I thought. She came in with soft words and concerned eyes, telling me she was worried about how I would cope alone. At first, I believed her. I was fragile, and her presence felt like a lifeline. She would pat my hand and talk about how much Daniel had loved me. But before long, her concern began to take on another tone. She started pointing out the stairs in the house, the upkeep, how overwhelming it must be for someone my age. She smiled when she said it, but it landed like a judgment. Andrew, her husband, reinforced the same message. He would bring brochures for retirement communities, laying them out on the kitchen table as though he was doing me a favor. He'd mention how lovely it would be for me to have people my own age around, how I wouldn't have to worry about mowing the lawn or paying for repairs. They painted it as freedom, but what I heard was exile. Every suggestion, every pamphlet, felt like another reminder that I was being nudged out of the life Daniel and I had built. I tried to brush it off, telling myself they only wanted what was best. But then came the smaller humiliations that cut deeper than they knew. Melissa would wave me off when I tried to share memories of Daniel, saying I should stop dwelling on the past. Andrew once laughed when I asked about the household bills, telling me money matters were too complicated for me. I felt myself shrinking in my own home, becoming invisible. It grew worse with time. Their visits felt less like company and more like inspections. They would walk through the house, pointing out worn furniture, peeling paint, even the garden Daniel had cherished. Each observation carried the same message: I wasn't capable anymore. The place that had been my sanctuary became a stage for their judgments. The breaking point came one evening when they arrived unannounced, carrying an air of decision. Melissa looked me straight in the eye and said it was time for me to find somewhere else to live. She said Daniel's will left everything to her, that the house was legally hers, and she had only allowed me to stay out of kindness. She told me I should pack my things, that it was time for me to move on. Her words left me hollow. The home where I had celebrated birthdays, nursed Daniel through illness, and poured 40 years of my life into reduced to a possession they claimed as theirs. I stood there stunned, clutching the arms of my chair to keep steady, while Melissa and Andrew spoke of renovations and new beginnings, as though I were already gone. That night, I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, the shadows moving across the walls. My grief had already taken so much, but now it seemed my own child was determined to strip away what little I had left. I felt like a ghost in my own life, hovering at the edges, unwanted. And yet, as broken as I was, something inside me whispered that there was more to this story. Daniel had been a meticulous man, careful with every detail. Could it really be true that he left me with nothing? The thought was faint, but it sparked a question that refused to leave my mind. I remember the day I left that house with only 2 suitcases and a box of photographs. 42 years of marriage, of family, of memories reduced to luggage that could fit in the trunk of Andrew's car. He loaded my belongings with the efficiency of a man taking out the trash, while Melissa checked her watch, impatient for me to be gone. I stood on the porch, staring at the home I had poured my soul into, and felt the deepest humiliation of my life. When the door closed behind me, it felt final. Not just the end of a chapter, but the erasure of my place in the story altogether. I had been a wife, a mother, a caretaker. I had sacrificed dreams I once had: my career, my independence, even my voice, so that my family could thrive. And in the end, I was told I was useless, cast aside like I had never mattered. That first night in a small motel room, I sat on the sagging mattress and cried until there were no tears left. The carpet smelled of mildew, the walls were thin, and I could hear the hum of traffic outside. I had never felt so small, so disposable, for the first time in my life. I wondered if Melissa was right. Maybe I was just the wife. Maybe I was finished. But then, in the quiet hours of the morning, a thought came back to me. Daniel. My husband had been many things: stubborn at times, protective to a fault, but careless was never one of them. He had always been meticulous about the future, about our finances, about making sure I would be cared for. I remembered the evenings when he would sit me down and walk me through his plans, making me promise that if anything happened to him, I would be secure. Could it really be true that he left me with nothing that didn't sound like the man I knew? The doubt was small at first, but it grew with every hour I sat in that motel room,
I thought about the will Melissa had claimed to see, the documents she waved like weapons. What if she was lying? By sunrise, I knew I couldn't stay in despair. I owed it to myself and to Daniel to find out the truth. I wiped my face, gathered what strength I had left, and decided I would seek answers. I would not be discarded so easily. The next morning, I used the motel's old computer to look up Daniel's attorney. His name was Richard Hall, a man we had trusted for years. My heart pounded as I dialed his office, half afraid he would confirm Melissa's story, half desperate to hear otherwise. When his secretary told me to come in right away, I felt a flicker of hope. Richard greeted me with the same warm steadiness I remembered from when Daniel and I first bought our home. But the moment I mentioned that Melissa claimed to have inherited everything, his eyes darkened. He pulled a thick folder from his cabinet and slid it across the desk. Inside was Daniel's will signed, notarized, and stamped only months before his death. As Richard read aloud, my breath caught in my chest. Daniel had left me the house, every piece of furniture inside it, and 70% of all his financial assets. 70%. It was written in clear, deliberate language, exactly the kind of meticulous planning Daniel had always done. And then came the part that stopped me cold. The will stated that Melissa would receive a large sum as well, but it came with conditions. Her share was placed in a trust, and she would only gain access to it if she treated me with dignity and respect after Daniel's passing. If she failed, her entire portion would revert to me. My heart raced as the truth sank in. Melissa hadn't just lied. She had committed fraud. She had shoved me out of my own house while holding documents she knew weren't valid. She had stolen what was rightfully mine, and in doing so, she had cost herself everything. The realization was dizzying. I thought back to the night I left the house with my suitcases, to her cold eyes watching me like I was an inconvenience. Rage mixed with grief. And yet underneath it all was something new, empowerment. For the first time since Daniel's death, I didn't feel like a helpless widow. I felt like a woman who had been underestimated and who now held the truth in her hands. Richard told me what Melissa had done was more than betrayal. It was elder abuse, fraud, crimes that could carry real consequences. His words were steady, but inside me everything was spinning. I wanted to collapse under the weight of it, yet part of me wanted to stand taller than I ever had before. That night, I returned to my motel room, clutching copies of the will as though they were lifelines. The phone rang before I even sat down. It was Melissa. Her voice was honeyed, almost pleading. She said she had only ever wanted what was best for me, that maybe she had been harsh, but she was just trying to protect me. She spoke as though nothing had happened, as though the lies and cruelty could be smoothed over with sweet words. But I knew better now. I knew exactly what she had done, and I knew she wasn't finished. That call wasn't reconciliation, it was strategy. And I had the sinking feeling that her next move would be even more ruthless. Just when I thought I had the truth firmly in my hands, Melissa and Andrew struck back. They showed up with a new kind of confidence, one that chilled me to the bone. They hinted that Daniel's finances weren't as clean as I believed, that there were things hidden in his business dealings, things that could ruin everything for me if they came to light. Their tone was sharp, almost smug, as if they had discovered a weapon strong enough to undo me completely. For a moment, fear swallowed me whole. What if they were right? What if the inheritance Daniel had left was tainted? My mind raced back over the years, the long hours he worked, the business meetings he never discussed in detail. Had I been blind? Was I living on a foundation built from secrets? My chest tightened at the thought that everything could be taken from me all over again this time, not by Melissa's lies, but by Daniel's hidden truths. The weight of it nearly crushed me. I sat alone afterward, hands trembling, staring at the papers Richard had given me. The will had felt like protection, like Daniel's voice reaching from beyond the grave to assure me I was safe. But now doubt crept in, threatening to steal even that comfort. And then, as if fate refused to let me sink, Richard called. His voice was calm, deliberate, carrying the kind of certainty that steadies a storm. He told me Daniel had anticipated this very possibility. He had left behind not only a will, but records carefully organized, authenticated, beyond reproach. Daniel had known Melissa's entitlement, and he had also known the importance of shielding me from any potential attack. Every asset, every account, every detail had been made legitimate and airtight. My inheritance wasn't a fragile gift, it was a fortress he had built around me. The fear that had gripped me loosened its hold. Relief swept through. Not soft and gentle, but fierce, almost overwhelming. For the first time since Daniel's death, I felt his presence not as a loss, but as protection. He had seen what I couldn't, prepared for battles I never imagined, and left me not only with security, but with strength. Melissa and Andrew thought they had me cornered, but Daniel had already written the ending to their scheme. And now, with truth on my side, I was no longer afraid. I was ready to face them, ready to reclaim my life. The day of reckoning came sooner than I expected. Richard had gathered the evidence, every forged document, every false claim Melissa and Andrew had made. The authorities were ready, but before anything official happened, I wanted my moment, my chance to look them in the eye and tell them they had underestimated me for the last time. When Melissa and Andrew arrived at my home, not theirs, they walked in with the arrogance of people still convinced they held power. Melissa's eyes darted around, as if she was already imagining where her furniture would go, as though the truth hadn't already slipped from her hands. Andrew carried himself with the smugness of a man who thought money and manipulation could fix anything. I let them speak first. Melissa tried to soften her voice, pretending to be the concerned daughter again. She said things could still be made right if only I would be reasonable, if I would share what Daniel had left behind. Andrew followed with his own brand of pressure, talking about reputations and family, hinting at how messy things could get if I didn't cooperate. But for once, I wasn't the one shrinking under their words. I stood taller than I had in years. I told them I knew everything, the real will, the conditional clause, the fraud they had committed when they forged documents and threw me out of my own house. Their faces shifted instantly. Melissa's confidence cracked, replaced by wide-eyed panic, while Andrew's jaw tightened as if he was calculating his next move. Melissa tried to plead then, her voice trembling, painting herself as the misunderstood daughter who had only been trying to help. She reached for my sympathy, hoping I would crumble the way I always had in the past. But this time, I didn't bend. I reminded her of the night she told me I was useless, the night she ordered me to find somewhere else to die. I told her those words had burned themselves into me, but instead of destroying me, they had lit a fire I didn't know I carried. And then,
Justice arrived at the door. The knock was firm, official. 2 officers stepped inside, documents in hand. Melissa's pleas turned into protests, and Andrew barked about misunderstandings. But it was no use. The evidence was clear. They were being charged with fraud and elder abuse. I watched as the color drained from their faces, as the reality of consequences finally closed in. As they were escorted out, Melissa turned back one last time, eyes filled with disbelief and betrayal, as though I had wronged her. But I felt no guilt, only relief, only strength. For the first time in years, I wasn't the invisible, obedient mother or the grieving widow. I was a woman who had defended herself, who had uncovered the truth, who had taken back her life. The sound of the door closing behind them was the most satisfying silence I had ever heard. Justice had been served, and with it came the unshakable knowledge that I was no longer a victim. I was the survivor. I was the victor. In the months that followed, my life began to look very different. The house that once felt like a prison of memories now feels like a place of renewal. I walk through the rooms and, for the first time, I see my own reflection in every corner. Not just Daniel's preferences, not just Melissa's demands, but mine. I painted the walls in colors I love. I planted flowers in the garden that bloom in wild, joyful colors. I even carved out a small studio where I spend mornings painting, rediscovering a passion I had set aside decades ago. For so long, I believed my worth was tied to how much I gave to others, how much I sacrificed as a wife and as a mother. But this journey taught me something I should have known all along. Respect is the foundation of love. And without respect, family is only DNA. Blood does not excuse betrayal. True family are the ones who protect you when you are at your weakest, not the ones who exploit your pain for their gain. I no longer see myself as the abandoned widow who was told to find somewhere else to die. I am a woman who found the strength to stand, to fight, and to reclaim her dignity. And in doing so, I discovered that the greatest justice is not only seeing those who hurt you face consequences, it is building a life so full, so free, that their absence no longer leaves a hole. If you've ever felt underestimated, discarded, or betrayed by the people who were supposed to love you most, I want you to know you are not alone. You have more strength than you think. And sometimes, the hardest betrayals open the door to the strongest transformations. Thank you for listening to my story. If it spoke to you, I'd love to hear your own experiences. Share them in the comments because your voice matters. And if you'd like to support more stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs the reminder that dignity, respect, and self-worth are never negotiable.